The Daytona 500 is NASCAR's greatest race, the Great American Race. There's been so much history put in it. It has defined NASCAR since its inception, and today I want to look at the greatest of the great. Now, I'm going to say this going right into it. This will not look directly at the racing itself. There's been a lot of Daytona 500s that have had great racing, but are not remembered as great ones. This will look at great moments. This will look at cultural impact in NASCAR as well as in culture in general and how NASCAR fits in. It will look at the racing and it will look just overall at how fans look at these races. So without further ado, let's get into it. At number 10 is the 1976 Daytona 500. Listen, there is one reason in particular that this one is so big, because when a lot of fans look back at this race, they're not really as keen to it as a lot of people who are more history-based. And for me, the reason this one has to be on the list is the fact that it was the first great moment in the Daytona 500 that was really kind of shared around in color film, not in a black and white photo or in replays. And it was Petty versus Pearson at that. These were the two greatest drivers in NASCAR's history in the first half of NASCAR. And to see that these two had such a great battle where they didn't mean to crash each other, they were just racing so hard they took each other out. That is something that NASCAR is all about, pushing it to the limit whether you mean to or not. And for that reason, it has to be on the list. At number 9 is the 2010 Daytona 500. This race was the start of a new decade, and in a lot of ways you could see NASCAR changing, and this was really one of those big pushes to show that NASCAR was not going to be the same way it was in the 2000s. Now, this also was the final race on Daytona's old surface, so handling was a huge issue. You saw these cars darting around, you saw single car spins, and you saw basically the best of the best that drivers had. People say that Daytona and Talladega racing is really not talent-based racing, but I beg to differ when you look back at old Daytona footage like this. Then, of course, you had the famous pothole caution and the red flag that followed, and after that, it was like someone shot a gun off, and everyone went for broke for the win. It was the first Daytona 500 with multiple green-white checker finishes, and in the end it was Jamie McMurray having to hold off Dale Jr.'s hard charge to get the win in the Great American Race. At number 8 is the 2016 Daytona 500, and this one looked a lot like 2010 in the sense that old school racing was applicable here. A lot of the field got spread out, and handling was a huge issue. Looking directly at guys like Kevin Harvick, Chase Elliott, and Dale Earnhardt Jr., some of the best at Daytona and in the sport, having issues and spinning out at times because it was so hard to drive. Of course, at the end, the pack came back together, and there was a huge race at the end because, well, there weren't that many cars getting taken out. There was no giant crash like usual compared to other Daytona races. But the big part is where Denny Hamlin in the last lap flew up through the pack from about 5th or 6th, came up, challenged teammate Matt Kenseth, who almost spun out and had an amazing save that nobody ever seems to talk about, and then drag race Martin Truex Jr. to the line to have the closest Daytona 500 finish ever at 1/100th of a second. At number 7 is another old one that not many people have seen too much of, and there isn't as much footage as people would want, but because of the historical context, needs to be on this list. And it's a 1959 Daytona 500, the first Daytona 500. This race started NASCAR on a trajectory that really did help prime it to get to the point that it was of takeoff. Yes, NASCAR was small at the time, but the Daytona 500 was a grueling race that drivers could really compare to something like the Indy 500. It was NASCAR's Indy 500 in that sense. And with it being the first race, the finish was one to remember as well. It was 3 wide to the finish, 2 of those cars being for the win, 1 of which being a lap down. And it took days to decide by design of NASCAR leader Bill France Sr. And Big Bill got his wish of having this race, of being something that was water cooler talk for tons of racing fans across America. So this one has to be on the list, and for me, it's at number 7. At number 6 is the 2005 Daytona 500, one that is not remembered as much as the more famous ones. I will say right now, just to get all of my bias out of the way, this for me objectively is my favorite Daytona 500. You see, it was a slow burn race, and for me that's something I love to watch. It started out very spread out. Handling, again, as I'm going to say a lot in this video, was a huge factor when it came to who was fast, who was mediocre, and who was just downright slow. Most of the day was dominated by 3 guys, Tony Stewart, Michael Waltrip, and Jeff Gordon. But you see, 2 of them had very big problems, and it was their Achilles heel at the day's end. Michael Waltrip with the blown engine, and Tony Stewart with the fact that he could not move the car around. He was only fast on the bottom line. So, because of this, if someone was fast up top, well, they were able to get by. And that was Dale Earnhardt Jr. at the end. Jr. had struggled all day, but had somehow managed to get his poor handling car, that later was reported to have a few different pieces broken, and he was managing to go up there and take the lead away from Tony Stewart. But the race was not over as Jeff Gordon managed to outduel Little Lee and get his final Daytona 500. To me, this race should be remembered as an instant classic. Breaking into the top 5, we have the 1993 Daytona 500. And this one is on here for 2 reasons. One is the competitive level of it. Early on in early restrictor plate racing, it was more competitive than unrestricted racing. But the thing is that it still wasn't to the level of competition that we're used to and expecting to see today. So with 38 lead changes in the early 90s plate era, it was kind of unheard of in a lot of senses. A lot of times drivers would lead well over 100 laps and it would just be a slog through the day. But in the end, even though Dale Earnhardt did dominate this race, it was another Dale that was dueling him, Dale Jarrett. And the thing that makes this race so memorable and so important is the fact that his father, Ned Jarrett, was the one who was announcing the race to his son's victory. Nicknamed the Dale and Dale Show, this race will forever live on in NASCAR history. At number 4, we have the 2014 Daytona 500. This was one that kicked off an amazing season for NASCAR's Cup Series. See, it started off single file for the most part, and the early part of the race during the day was pretty much a slog to get through. And then the rain delay didn't make it any better, and you kind of thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be one of those bad races that we're just going to race to halfway to whenever they get back racing. Well, we were all wrong. It was absolute hell breaking loose that night. There was 3 and 4 wide racing throughout the night. The lead was changing back and forth. And for the plate package that really was in NASCAR from about 2013 through 2019, this was the best race of all of them. There was a little controversy with the Casey Kane penalty, but it was definitely overshadowed by the final runs of the race where Dale Jr. would duel guys like Greg Biffle, Carl Edwards, Matt Kenseth, Kyle Busch, Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon, Brad Keselowski, you name it. Jr. showed his mastery in the draft and got the most popular win probably of the decade. Now, maybe the most popular victory in the Daytona 500 ever was by Dale Earnhardt in the 1998 Daytona 500. Listen, I'm not going to lie to you, the racing itself is nothing special in this race, and had Dale Earnhardt not won it, we would not remember it. The late 90s NASCAR racing at Daytona and Talladega was not as good as stuff before or definitely after it. But you see, the big thing for this race is how important it is to Dale Earnhardt's legacy. Of course, we've all heard Mike Joy's call. 20 years of trying, 20 years of frustration, Dale Earnhardt comes to the caution flag to win the Daytona 500. That's the thing. Had Dale Earnhardt not won this race and either retired or passed away like he did, he would always be remembered as having a 0 at the Daytona 500, even though he had great results outside of it. And how do we know this? Well, we see Tony Stewart has a similar legacy, and Kyle Busch is kind of building the same kind of legacy. Dale Earnhardt would be that times 1,000. But we saw the great win. We saw him do donuts through the infield, and to this day, this win is probably one of the most replayed ones of any in Daytona 500 history because of the significance it has to the sport. At number 2 is the 1979 Daytona 500. And I know a lot of people are going to be against me for this, but again, this is my personal thoughts on the matter. See, the big thing with this race to start with was the fact that it was the first race to be televised flag to flag with coverage, and NASCAR really capitalized on it. There was a huge snowstorm on the East Coast that got a lot of people inside watching that race. It was also Dale Earnhardt's first 500, where he showed a lot of good competitive racing throughout it. But of course, we all remember this race, and we all know this race for the fight and the finish. The finish being Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison, where they got into each other, hit each other, spun into the outside wall of turn 3, and then, of course, Richard Petty gets past and wins the race. But of course, we all know it as the race with the fight, where the Allisons and Yarborough scuffled in the mud, punched each other, and it has been replayed for years and years and years since this race was run. For my number 1 pick, I have the 2007 Daytona 500. For me, this race encapsulates everything that NASCAR wants to see in a Daytona 500 and that NASCAR fans want to see. And also, it was the last Gen 4 race for the Daytona 500 as well. But here's the thing. The first half of this race, people forget, was very spread out, which, again, I am completely fine with as a fan. It was dominated by 2 guys, Tony Stewart and Kurt Busch. But the big turning point of this race was when both of them got together and crashed themselves out of the race. At that point, it was a free-for-all. Anyone could win this race. And towards the end of the race, there was a tighter pack, more crashes, but the guy who seemed to be getting it done and seemed like was going to cement his legacy with finally getting a 500 was that of Mark Martin in the 01 Ginn Racing Chevrolet for the U.S. Army. And he took the white flag too, ahead of guys like Kyle Busch and Matt Kenseth. Though it was Kevin Harvick, who at that point wasn't known as the closer, but started that legacy there, who charged up from about 7th or 8th on the high side, got the big run while the bottom started to disintegrate, and drag raced Mark Martin to the finish to barely beat him to the line, while the rest of the field crashed and Bowyer went upside down and on fire. This race is everything for the guys who like spread out strategic racing, for the guys who like the good packs, for those fans who love close finishes, and of course the fans who love the crashes. And the fact that you had a heartbreak there makes this race even more memorable. I'd even argue that had Mark Martin not lost in heartbreaking fashion but won in a close fashion, we wouldn't remember this race as much as we do. We remember it because we wish that Mark Martin would have won that race. But that's just my thoughts, and to me, that is the best Daytona 500 when you look objectively at them. And with that, those are my 10 picks for the best Daytona 500s. Now I want to hear from you. What are your picks for your top 10, maybe top 5, top 3, or just your favorite Daytona 500? Let me know however much you want to down in the comments below. And while you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. And also to all my channel members, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it so much. And I can't wait to have a fun season giving you more content to enjoy. So until next time, have a good one.